I remember really being fascinated by my hands when they started to work. You know, I don't know if you guys can remember that. I remember.
Oh yeah,
realizing
I'm still finding out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when that starts to happen to you, you know, it should happen when you're very young, hopefully, and it did for me, and so that I had plenty of time to do that. And I messed up some good records by playing like that. You know, other people would argue. I think I can't listen to them because I just hear myself playing, having a conversation with myself, and that wasn't good. You know, but it took those kinds of things to
well,
get
now,
into
because you're not off the hook with this question.
Oh.
that was somewhere in that statement a minute ago. Was that I'm really curious how you approach it now. If you're given a piece of music, is it a combination of a sound will present itself based on the piece of music you're given, or you have a certain area perhaps you've been working and you think, I know now the appropriate place, because you're a real architect of sound, and it comes from a very different place than most people.
I think that that started with me, and I hate to kind of say it like this because it doesn't sound very romantic, but I think when I discovered sampling, I think that's what happened to me, and. I was fascinated by the fact that I could do this, just like that, or I could go maybe something with a little more tone than that, and then spread it out. And when I heard the notes, that was it. I think each one of us, if you're all drummers out there, is everybody a drummer? Okay. Well, I think that amongst with drummers, I think there's a piano player in us, or there's a guitar player in us, or there's a clarinet player in us. You know,
a singer,
and a singer. You know, but I mean, why do you go to the drums? Why did I go to the drums? I don't know why. I always was fascinated by piano and guitar, but every time I would try to mess with it, I thought, like you said, I said, oh, no, I'm a drummer.
That's a primal thing.
Right.
Why does a 3-year-old go hit that A, and that sounds a lot better than playing a, B flat on an accordion?
Exactly. Exactly. Now, nothing wrong with the accordion.
No,
okay?
I love the accordion.
But here's the thing that really this is I think this is really important, and this is still kind of answering your question. I think what's really important to me for all my life, and I think it'd be very important to you, is to listen to. I don't know what kind of music you listen to now at your age, but I could make a guess, knowing this generation. I would say, for me, when I was a kid, when I was your age, I listened to everything. I was very fortunate to, and somebody said this in the beginning of this little thing here about who you hang out with. When you can hang out with really brilliant people, that's going to help you. You can hang out with your friends that might be about at your level. That's fine, that's great. But make sure you get to hang out with some brilliant people somewhere along the way. It doesn't have to be music, just brilliant people somehow. I was fortunate to have several geniuses in my life when I was a kid. We didn't know they were geniuses at the time, but I got turned on to Stravinsky at a very early age, Bartók, beautiful things like Debussy, and just generally really futuristic, new composers, as well as the great masters, Mahler, and wonderful classical music. Now, that to me, I would be listening to that. We would have nights where we would sit around and listen to, say, Stravinsky and just absorb, Rite of Spring or Firebird, and listen to all the things and just get into like what in the world? How does a mind make that happen? Because when you hear, like the four of us, we had a little jazz group and we'd play, and it was so uncomplex compared to that. You know, like how do you make that happen? But yet, we would listen also to Miles. We would listen to Coltrane, and then I would be with my girlfriend, and we would be listening to doo-wop, which was at that time was the thing. Was like, you know, really just sappy. I won't call it sappy. I won't. I mean, I used to call it sappy, but it wasn't sappy. It wasn't sappy. It was my heart. It was pop music that made me fall in love with her. And even to this day, when I hear some of those old songs, it makes my stomach move, man. And remembering those old times, you know, when we, you know, I'm fortunate that we're still together. We're married 50 years in October. Very unusual for a drummer. So
she's a very unusual woman.
Yes, that's what it is. But anyway, just to wrap it up from what I'm trying to say is that I think it's key to love music, really love music, especially if you're a drummer.
You're talking about the soundtrack of your life. You're fortunate you've had a very rich one.
Yes.
But whatever it is, we're facing a time now, too, where a lot of, when I was in Toronto rehearsing for the last tour 2 years ago, just for fun on my commute back and forth to the rehearsal studio, I listened to the local pop station. And pop was pretty interesting. It's a combination of R&B and hip-hop influence, very interesting sonically and all that. But at the end of 2 weeks, I realized I hadn't heard one drummer, right? Not one drum was played on all of the top 40 records of pop music right then. So that's what you guys are all up against. We grew up with pop music that had drummers in it. And, you know, I always loved this, Hal Blaine, you know, my favorite 12 drummers were all Hal Blaine. But we were listening to really classic stuff, and I used to sit and play along with the radio in my bedroom to Simon & Garfunkel records, Homeward Bound. And it's Hal Blaine, and that's what I was learning from. That's the feel, that's what I thought drums should sound like. And what a great example to be set. Yes, to have that kind of a rich soundtrack of inspiration and possibility and impossibility that Stravinsky brings you. But even bringing it closer to home, you're a little more starved for excellence, you know, in the culture right now, when it was so broad in that sense, when even the pop music of the time was the best musicians. And back in the big band era, it was the best musicians playing the best music of the era. You know, that doesn't come along. It happened again in the late 60s, I think, when you had the best musicians playing the best music. And it ranged from Miles to all the, you know, King Crimson, for example. Just that range. These were really excellent players playing excellent music. It doesn't happen very often, and it's not happening right now. So that's what worries me. It must be awfully hard to be fed that well, to be nourished that richly with art around you now. So that, Jim's advice is so great. You're going to have to seek it out. And you're going to have to find those kind of examples of excellence. Go back and listen to what made Kind of Blue a genius, world-changing evolutionary event, and listen to why Stravinsky changed the world. Yeah, these are all real things.
And you know, and also, like, don't be embarrassed about what you like. Don't apologize for
what you don't know.
Yeah, exactly. You know, because there's something in. I just believe, I heard a conversation the other day that really disturbed me. It was somebody was saying how they hated. They hated. I forgot exactly what it was. They hated some kind of music, and then I was asked a question about it, and I said, you know, the thing is, how could you say you hate anything? First of all. You shouldn't hate anything. Hate is a horrible thing, but especially you shouldn't hate some kind of art. Why don't you say, I don't understand it, or I don't like it right now because it's not doing something for us, it's not hitting me somehow. But don't say you hate something, especially music. Embrace all kinds of music, you know, because that's what a musician is for, right? Isn't that what a musician is supposed to be about? You know, So what Neil was just saying is that's a sad fact, I think, for maybe this generation. But you know, it's interesting to me. A few friends of mine have teenage children, and what they hate. I mean, this is just two people I'm talking about here. I don't know about the whole thing, but they always talk about how they don't like their generation's, what's going on in their generation. So they listen to the stuff like he's talking about, like where there are real players playing together, interacting. So when I hear that, I think, well, really, every generation has had the same situation. Something that came before them, you know, has now changed. You know, like for me, when I was coming up, or when we were coming up, or you know, we're in different generations, but when we were coming up, it was like that was what was happening. It was real fascinating. But now it's this. So how are you supposed to deal with that? Well, like for instance, I was talking about sampling a minute ago. For me, how that changed my world, how I believe that it changed my world. This you have right now. You have all the technology available to you that would have Jimi Hendrix or how far back do you want to go? Any great artist from back in the day would have loved to have these tools. And what would they have done with these tools? I think that's so. You should be celebrating really this generation, which is so technologically advanced. Take that and apply real flesh and blood music with that. You know.
Further to that thought, reminds me of a friend of our daughters. That their son was over at our house, and he saw all of my vinyl, and he said, "Those records? Like, I've heard of these things called records. I've never actually seen one." I said, "Yes," and I pulled one out. I said, "Oh, have a look at this." And I pulled something out with a big gatefold sleeve, and I said, "Look at this, this is amazing. You can see the artwork, you can read the lyrics, the credits, who wrote things, who played on it, who engineered it." And so I said a stupid thing. I said, "So I guess you must have a lot of CDs." And he just sort of blankly looked at me like, CDs. He's like completely bypassed that generation. Right. And I said, "Oh yes, you're one of the downloading generation." So I said, "Okay, now just allow me this moment to try to educate you a little bit about. Have you ever listened to in the entire album of any of the artists you have in your iPod when you're not on a skateboard with one of those little white earbuds hanging out, which sound terrible?" And he said, "No." I said, "Well, do yourself a favor, get yourself a good pair of headphones, download an entire record, doesn't matter whose it is, and listen to it from the beginning to the end. The artist has created a journey here for you that is meant to be enjoyed and experienced in the totality of the whole experience, not just these a la carte sound bites, which unfortunately, with the technological overload that we are all faced with, people don't have the attention span to take an hour out of their life to do that. But I highly suggest that. I'm not suggesting that you all are necessarily of that generation or of that mindset, but it illustrated clearly to me that there was a whole generation of people that were missing a very fundamental part of what the music creating, the creation of a record and the presentation of that record was. And then when we all grew up, I know that I used to listen to something beginning to end, because this was, you think about very carefully how you sequence your records, all the songs, how it tells the story. Yeah. And also, not to mention, think of the time that you spend crafting sonically what it sounds like. And you want people to hear that, not just hear it off a bunch of tinny earbuds. Yeah. Now, I think that's a wonderful experience for me to revisit now at this point in my life, because things go by pretty quickly, and sometimes the only time I have is when it's in the car. I can listen to perhaps a whole record without, turn my phone off. And that's something that seems to go by a lot of younger people as an experience to have in music. So thank you very much for that moment.
No, that's well said.
At this point is really, again, what all of you are obviously serious drummers, so you appreciate the essence of music and of drumming. So I'm trying to get at more what you're up against in this fragmentation of the audience and the short attention span and all that, and all artists face that now. And not long ago we met with Pete Townsend from The Who, and we told him that our band, we just finished making an album, and he said, "Oh, waste of time making an album nowadays, isn't it?" And he was saying that he'd been doing some volunteer work in a British prison to try to teach music, but all these people just wanted to be DJs. All they wanted was decks, right? That was their idea. They didn't want to play an instrument and take all that time to learn all the stuff that you people are. That's the way things are, but it's not the way everything is.
Right.
There will still be an opportunity for you to play real music
That's
in
right.
the undercurrents of that, and there's still ways for that real music to get heard. And that's why the fundamental values that we started out preaching of getting technique, experience, learning to listen, learning about the way music is structured and how a drummer might respond to that music and enrich that music. And the way Jim was saying too, you're not just giving something to a company or the choice that Steve Gadd made. Well, the best contribution I can make to this song is stay out of it. You know, that's a generous and artistic decision also. So I think it's more important to address really what you people are facing coming into a fragmented art world right now, but how these tools that we champion are still of value and things that change. Yes, technology is helpful. Sampling has been the same tool for me and the same learning curve and the same expansion of my sonic palette.
Yeah.
And that continues, and that's all there. And as long as you aren't, again, just hearing all this pop music without drummers in it, that's what makes me worry for you people of where does it fit then? Well, it still fits in live music. Live music still does survive. And as things, I always call it the garage band cycle. When the doo-wop cycle got to the point where a band in a garage couldn't reproduce that music, then we came to the guitar bands, right? That was the first wave of the British bands, because suddenly garage bands, the generation I grew up, nearly everybody at school played something, because you could get together in a band and you could play Wipeout, and you could play, you know, Beatles songs and Rolling Stone songs and all that. And then in the late 60s, it all got technique got beyond garage bands. So again, there was a revolution, punk music. It went back to the garages to where, you know, kids could thrash out their anger in music that they could reproduce. And then it happened again through the 80s when synthesizers and machinery started to take over again around the 1990s. Again, a huge revolution in the Seattle bands, Guns N' Roses, and that became popular bands with real guitars and real drums.
Yep.
And that was a revolution of the time. And we're due for another one, certainly. People are going to get so sick of that. That fact that you're listening to this pop music, do they get desensitized, you know, to where are they going to hear one day a song on pop radio with a real drummer and go, whoa, what's that? You know, that's what you have to hope for, or that you could bring that gift to it and have a percussive idea or a sonic soundscape idea that would change that, because all they're doing is pressing buttons, and it's as formulated and as cynical as could possibly be. And yes, it's impossible to hate music in its true spirit, but marketing, it's possible to hate.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you know, that is the enemy, but it always was the enemy. When I was starting out in the 60s and 70s, oh, you have to write short songs.
Yeah.
And our first band's trying to make an album, well, we don't hear a single here. And we run up against this wall again and again until you punch through that, and then you have to choose, no, I won't compromise. No, I won't. I'll fight that battle, but I still fight it 40 years later. It still comes up all the time of people wanting to do things the cheap way, wanting to do things the marketing way, and you continually have to learn. Among my band, we decided the most important word a musician can learn is no. In so many ways. When we started to get a little bit popular, and people would say, "Oh, you've got 7 shows in a row. Could you do 2 shows on this day because the show's doing well?" And of course, yes, because supply and demand, right? You've been all supply and no demand, and when that changes a little bit, people actually want you somewhere and want you to play. Yes, you say yes and yes until it starts to kill you, and then you have to learn to say no. And also, a lot of people with suspect motives suggesting you should do things. They don't think with your values, and they don't have your interests at heart at all. And they're saying, oh yes, things are going well. We're going to send you out on tour for 6 months straight of one-nighters. How many bands has that destroyed? You know, from the inside out, just crushed them. So that's why we thought it was interesting. The word no is a very important thing to learn, but you can't wield it for a long time. You don't have the right to, right? You're all supply and no demand.
Yeah. This is a guy who really knows what he's talking about with that. That's an amazing. I don't know if that you know, if they can relate to that at this point in the game, but man, that's.
Well, it's also it applies really across the board, even outside of music. As you just get older, you have to learn to be more judicious in your thinking, and about the things that are important to you. Things that are a waste of time, that relationships that get outmoded, and you say no. You've sort of moved through that. That is an important word to learn across everything. and at my stage of life, I feel like, yes, is actually quite a good word, and it feels quite good to say it sometimes as well.
Yeah, but even when we were in cover bands, it's possible to play in a cover band and play songs you like. You know, it wasn't like some vanity thing where, oh, we only play songs we wrote. No, we played cover tunes, but they were all songs that we liked, and compromise was playing a song we didn't like. And that was where we drew the line, you know, but it was still evolving from band. We started writing our own material and all that, and it was strictly a no-compromise situation. But it began as simply as that. Very early on, the musicians I worked with shared that purity, and no, we only make music we love. And I went on to do other things for a living, you know, because I always thought, at a certain point I realized that I can make my living other ways and play the music I love. And if I had to do it part-time, I did that for some years, you know, just played music part-time, but it was the music I loved. So
there's a lot of people that play avocationally, I know, who are far happier than the vocational musicians I know, because they're not grumbling about the fact that I'm only making 25 bucks playing this gig. They're actually enjoying it. To wit, a group of doctors who were surgeons at Mount Sinai would play every Tuesday night at Eddie Condon's, and they were called the Mount Sinai Jazz Band. And I remember walking past, and I stuck my head in. They were the incredible players, every one of them. And they weren't upset about the fact that they were only making 25 bucks. So they were making, you know, their day jobs provided them with a pretty good income. And I thought, that's wonderful. They play with this joy and vitality that we could all learn from. And I think that when you get to the point of diminishing returns, when you're doing gigs and they're so soul-destroying, or there's such a degree of compromise that after a certain point you think, I'd rather not do it, that's where no is a very, very good word to have in your lexicon. I do want to ask you a question, though, relative to what you were talking about with the band and doing your own material, because is it 38 years
this
you've been?
band, yeah, 38 years.
And I'm through the, you know, you've also, like Jim, sort of gone through a lot of different sonic identities, which have all been true to who you were at that moment. But I'm curious, because you were always writing from an early time, if your writing at that point was directly affecting your playing, and if so, in what way, and how would that be different than the way it is now when you're writing?